So good morning, everyone. Finally sorted the screens. It's great to be here. I'm Gergely. Thank you for the introduction, Jose. And I am most well known right now for writing The Pragmatic Engineer, which is a newsletter that does dive into big tech and startups. And I do talk with people working at these companies. And I also wrote the book, The Software Engineer's Guidebook. And before I started this newsletter, I worked at tech companies. So I worked at Uber, Skyscanner, Skype. I like to say Skype, but it was actually Microsoft at the time. I got to work on the Xbox One, which came out a bit more than 10 years ago now, and at JP Morgan. And I was a software engineer for about 10 years, engineering manager for another 5, and I kicked off this newsletter where I'm now writing about the stuff that I've been doing. But today, we're going to talk about change. And we're going to talk about, we've seen a lot of change lately in the tech industry, more than usual. But we're going to talk about a specific type of change that feels like it's a very new type of change, but it's something that we actually might have seen before, at least people who have been in the tech industry for a long enough time. And let me give you one example to start with. So these days, we're starting to see small teams move faster, build solutions kind of faster than they would have normally done in the past. And this kind of makes sense, right? Like we have better tools, we have better know-how, more seniority. An example is Blue Sky, a Twitter competitor. It's nice that we mentioned Twitter. You know, like a lot of people, I think, heard about me the first time when Twitter was in turmoil, and I managed to talk with people who were working there. I no longer know anyone who's working there, by the way, even though I know a lot of people. But Blue Sky is one of the challengers to Twitter these days, and what they did is they started in 2022, so almost 2 years ago. That's when the company was founded. They had one CEO, Jay, and 2 developers. They started to develop a mobile app 6 months later with 2 developers. Only one developer was developing an iOS and an Android app. They did a soft launch 1 year ago. In 6 months, they got to 1 million users. And last month, they were at 5.5 million users, and they have 12 developers. And this is kind of impressive in the sense of what a small team launches this kind of application. Usually, most companies have way more developers for similar scale. But we've seen this before, haven't we? This is not entirely new. I mean, here's an example from 2010 from a different startup. They started mobile development. They got to 1 million users in the first year, then to 5 million, 10 million, then 30 million. And in 2 years, they were at 13 developers. And of course, I'm talking about Instagram, which is one of these well-known stories. And if we compare the 2 together, it's a very similar timeline in terms of when I just look at the number of developers. And I mean, Instagram got to more users, but both of these companies built an iOS app, an Android app, and a website, and obviously the backend services, and enough scale to handle those millions of users in the same time period. But the interesting thing is, it should have been a lot easier in 2022. I mean, in 2010, building native apps was really hard, and yeah, so I guess we kind of have seen this before. So what else is familiar from earlier times? And I reached out to a friend, Kent Beck. He's one of the Azure Manifesto founders. He's been very involved in TDD in the 2000s. He's just published a book recently called Tidy First, and he works at a company called Mechanical Orchard, where they help companies migrate their COBOL code using AI onto modern code, which is really cool. So anyway, I asked Kent, hey Kent, like you've been around in the industry for, like working in the software industry for 40 years. You've seen a lot. Have you seen some changes in software engineering where you feel they've happened before? And Kent is like, oh yeah, I've seen plenty. Here's one. Feedback loops are getting longer. And I was like, what do you mean? What kind of feedback loops? Like deploying to production? Like responding to like bug requests or something? He's like, no, every imaginable feedback loop. What I mean is, and this is him saying it, if as a team we made a mistake, we don't really want to know about it. Let it be someone else's problem. It's not our team's. And I was like, oh, really? That's what you're seeing? He's like, yeah, there's a lot of excuses for it, but it all seems like BS to me. And he tells me, like, this was like this in the 2000s as well. He's like, I don't know why, but it's just going back to where it used to be. I was like, huh, that's interesting. So it seems we're seeing a couple of things that did happen before. But today, we'll start by talking about what is happening right now. Then we'll talk about the new reality of things, and then we'll go back to like, where did we see this before and why? So let's start with what is going on. What is going on in the tech industry? And we've seen change. I'll talk about a few different areas: the job market, VC funding, IPOs, and big tech. So on the job market, in 2021, it was, looking back, it was the hottest tech job market ever, like probably in all of tech history, where if you wanted to get a job, that was the time to get a raise, to get a better opportunity. And to give an example of how crazy this was, here's a CTO at a scale-up in Germany back in the end of 2021 telling me this, that our interview process is short, but we're still seeing people drop out because they have multiple offers. We've lost a person that went to Twitter to work remotely. This was when Twitter announced remote work forever, before it was reversed a few years later. And the competition has intensified with Silicon Valley companies allowing remote work. And every single company, this was a well-funded scale-up. They raised, I think, tens of millions of euros or dollars. They were struggling to hire, and big tech was struggling to retain, and everyone was struggling to hire. And it was so good to be on the job market. It was really good to shop around. And we've seen reports of this. Just in February 2022, the New York Times also reported on tech companies facing this hiring crisis. But then, out of almost nowhere, in just 2 months later, we started to see some really unexpected layoffs, seemingly out of nowhere. First, Fast, the one-click checkout startup that raised $100 million a year ago, they just went bankrupt pretty much overnight. Bolt, one-click checkout, did layoffs. Klarna, buy now, pay later, they also let go, I think, 5 or 10% of staff. The instant delivery apps, fintech, cybersecurity, they all start to do like 5 or 10% layoffs. And it didn't really stop. In the fall of 2022, there were just more startups and scale-ups letting go. I think Stripe let go more than 10%. We had Lyft. We had a lot of startups. But there was one thing that kind of connected all of these. All of these companies were making a loss. So, I mean, we could kind of put it together. We're like, well, okay, I guess it's not great to have layoffs, but these companies are making a loss. Clearly, they're not able to raise money. I mean, that kind of makes sense, right? Like, and the thinking back then was like, well, maybe just beware if you're not working at a company that makes profit. Like, working at a profitable company should be fine. And then a month later, this happens. Meta, extremely profitable company. They're posting close to record profits, and they let 10% of staff go, 13%, 11,000 employees. And a few months later, every single other profitable company, publicly traded, Amazon, Microsoft, Google, they do the same. And when we look at the actual layoffs by number on this website called layoffs.fyi, there was this huge spike in 2023. So something was happening there, and it wasn't just non-profitable companies. But it wasn't just the job market. VC funding, up to 2021, it was just going up. It was going, this is every year from 2011 to 2021, it was going up, 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 and a huge jump in 2021. And after 2021, there was just a drop downwards. This is data from PitchBook, who are one of the best sources for this information. And right now, last quarter, in 2024, we are at 2018 levels. So it's kind of like we're seeing less venture capital, less money being able to go to startups. And it's not just the job market and venture capital, but IPOs, companies going public. Like companies going public is a big exit opportunity for people who work there. If you have shares, they're going to be worth something. And it's also a big one for investors. The more companies go public, the more money they have to reinvest. So again, in 2021, a huge spike in companies going public. These are the blue ones are the public listing, again, from PitchBook. And in 2023, this number dropped incredibly, and we saw 0 tech IPOs in 2022 and only 3 in 2023. And now we're seeing a couple more. But again, it just really went up and down. And finally, for big tech, some of the largest tech companies, this is where it gets really puzzling. Big tech did large layoff in 2023, where they let go a large amount of people, and we could justify that saying that was the pandemic. They overhired and they had to let people go. But now, just this January and February in this year, they all posted record profits. They were all doing very well financially, and they still went around and did more cuts. And Google specifically is a really good one to look at because it just highlights the seemingly doesn't make sense. So Google was founded in 1998. And I've marked the layoffs with reds whenever they had mass layoffs. In 2008, with the financial crisis, Google got worried and they let go of 2% of their staff, about 300 people. They had one layoff in 2013 where they bought Motorola and they let a lot of Motorola people go, but not Google employees, or the ones that were at Google. And then nothing. For 15 years, there was no layoff. So if in 2022 you looked at Google, it was the safest place to work. They had one mass layoff, which was a very small one in the financial crisis, but nothing else. And then in 2023, they let go of 6% of staff. And in 2024, they now seem to be doing layoffs again. And this is just very strange because Google has been awarded many times the best place to work in tech. So why were they doing this? It's pretty puzzling. So to sum it up, what we're seeing is less VC funding, fewer IPOs, big tech having record profits and still laying off, and the job market just getting tougher. So why? Why is this all happening? Something clearly changed around 2022 and 2023. And yes, the pandemic was easing, the lockdowns were ending. That is clearly one part. But as I look through the data, as I talk with people, as I talk with CTOs and founders on why they're doing this thing, it was something else. I found this article as I kind of reverse researching in the middle of 2022. The Fed, the Federal Reserve, which is like the central bank of the US, if you will, by a small stretch, they did an interest raise that was the largest in 28 years. And this is finance news. We're tech conference, we're software industry. Why am I talking about interest rates? Are we really going to talk about interest rates right now? Yes, we're really going to talk about interest rates right now. So it's going to be important for us to understand why interest rates are affecting tech in the end. And to start with, we need to understand why interest rates impact inflation, because the Fed did a raise in order to combat the high inflation in the US. Back then it was about 8% in the US, and they wanted to bring it down. So why would raising interest rates help reduce inflation? Well, I took this quote from the BBC, who talks about the UK central bank fighting inflation, which applies to the US, to Hungary with MMB, to EU with the European Central Bank. So this is from the BBC quote. The Bank of England, and any central bank really, moves rates up and down to control inflation in the country, and inflation means the increase of prices as we know over time. When inflation is high, the bank may decide to raise rates as well. But why would raising rates do anything with inflation? Well, when you raise rates, so when the central bank raises rates, everything goes up. The price of taking out a mortgage goes up, so fewer people are going to buy houses. The price of credit goes up, so interest on your credit card goes up, so you might think about doing it as well. And if you leave your money in the bank, before you got nothing, or like 0.25%. Now you might get 3 or 4 or 5%, so you're probably going to leave it there to accumulate and spend less. So demand in the economy will go down. People will spend less, and when people spend less, prices will not go up as much because it's silly to raise prices at that time because no one's going to buy it. And then the bank monitors this, whether they hold rates or whether they raise it. And it's a balance to raise prices against the risk of damaging the economy. So with this finance, I guess, lesson out of the way, this is important to see because there is a big question of why rates are so high globally. So let's go back to rates. So this is what it was like in the US, the rates. It was 0.25%. And it went to 5% in less than a year. This was a pretty big change. But let's zoom out. Let's zoom out 15 years. What were the rates like in the US? And it was, from 2009, it was almost zero all the way to like 2022. There was a small raise, you can see in steps. It went up to like 2% in 2017, and then it dropped down again because COVID started and the bank again wanted to stimulate the economy. But let's zoom out even more. Let's zoom out 50 years, or as long as we can, as long as we have data in the US. This is all the data we have from 1955 all the way to here. So like, I guess, modern American interest rate history. And something really interesting happens when we look at the only times there were low interest rates, which means 1% or below. In 1958, it was 2 months. In 2003, after the dot-com bust, it was 2 months. And then we had this 9 years straight from 2008, and then another 2 years. So like for 15 years, we've had very low interest rates. And this has never happened before, ever. The rates have only been for a few months, and now we were here for 15 years. And it's not just the US. If we look at Canada, if we look at the EU, if we look at the UK, it's all the same. The rates went down globally, everywhere. So, okay, but why should we care? Like, we're in tech. We're not in finance. I mean, I'm sure you enjoyed this interesting observation. But now let's get to like how it affects tech. Interest rates in startups are actually connected, and this is not me saying it. This is Matt Levine, a Bloomberg analyst who writes the money stuff daily newsletter in Bloomberg. And this is a quote from him. He's saying startups are a low interest rate phenomenon. When interest rates are low everywhere, $1 in 20 years is as good as $1 today. And this means that if you have $1 and you put it in the bank, in 20 years with a zero interest rate, you will have $1 in the bank. And so a startup's business model is, I will lose money for a decade building artificial intelligence and then make a lot of money in the far future in 10 or 20 years. That sounds pretty good, because what else are you going to do? You're going to just put your money in the bank and you're not going to get an interest. Instead, you put it in a startup and you're not going to see anything for 10 or 20 years, and you might see a big return or you might lose it all. You do this with 100 startups. You're a big fund, you invest $100 million, and over 10 years, you're not going to see anything, and then you might turn that 100 million to 150 or 200 or 250 million. And that sounds pretty good, because the alternative is make no interest. So Matt Levine continues, if some charismatic tech founder had come to you in 2021, I'm going to revolutionize the world via AI, robo-taxis, flying taxis, flake taxis, or blockchain, it might have been unnatural to reply, nah, what if the Fed raises rates by 0.25%? Because tech was supposed to be an industry with this radical vision of the future of humanity and not a bet on interest rates. Turns out it was a bet on interest rates all along. And when I read this, I think, maybe 6 months ago. At first I was like, no way, it can't be. But it actually is. So what happens when the rates go up, like they have? They go from 0 to 5%. Well, what this means for VC funding, you're just going to see less VC funding, because VC is funded by pension funds, high-net individuals, and all of them are like, I could just put my money into the bank for 5%. If I have $100 million and there's a 5% interest rate, every year I make $5 million. In 10 years, I make $150 million. In 10 years, by doing nothing, I turn that $100 million into $150 million with zero risk, or virtually zero risk. So VCs are going to have a hard time convincing them to give us into startups where in 10 years, you're not going to see anything. And when every year, you're going to see a return. There's going to be fewer IPOs initially, because a lot of fewer tech IPOs, because a lot of the tech companies are loss-making, and no one wants to give money to loss-making companies in a high interest rate world. Big tech will have to generate more profits than before, because everyone cares about more profits, because you can get more profits just by putting your money in the bank. And then the job market will just be tougher because of all this. But it's not just interest rates. Something else also happened in 2007, 2008. In 2007, this came out. The iPhone. It's pretty interesting, because that's also when the low interest rates started, almost at the same time. I think maybe a year after. But in 2008, Android came out. And then it wasn't just smartphones, which we know revolutionized everything, but in cloud computing, AWS launched in 2006, Azure, Google Cloud, 2008. And the timing is pretty darn incredible. I just mapped it out together, the smartphone key events and the cloud key events. They almost all happened right as interest rates went to zero. So not only did we have a low interest rate period where more venture capital will flow into startups, we actually had more reason to invest in startups, because suddenly the smartphone revolution birthed so many huge companies today. Spotify was founded in 2006, but they really took off with the iPhone and Android. WhatsApp, Instagram, Uber, Snap, they all exist because of smartphones. If it wasn't for this smartphone revolution, who knows if they would be around? And there's thousands of more. And cloud computing made a lot of startups just a lot easier or more profitable. Netflix, so these are all large AWS customers. Netflix, Airbnb, Stripe, Twitch. Without cloud computing, they would have had to build their own data centers. It would have been slower, more expensive. They would have not been able to grow as fast. And again, thousands of more companies were enabled. But it's been 15 years, and I think it's fair to say that the smartphone cloud computing revolution kind of maybe ran its course. Because now, 15 years later, building a mobile app or a cloud, it's just not a huge advantage. I mean, it is, but it's what everyone does. So to recap why all these changes happening now, it's because mostly of the low interest rates. But as an added interest, it was really interesting that when low interest rates started, we had two massive technology revolutions kick off. Now, these days, we're seeing the AI revolution kick off. So I marked that the ChatGPT launched in November 2022. We see AI is really hot. And this could be a very interesting and promising revolution, but it's now happening in a high interest rate environment, not a low interest rate one. So, this is what's happening, but what is the new reality? And I'll talk about what it means for software engineers and for engineering practices. For software engineers, it's just tougher to get a job. There are just fewer jobs posted. So these graphs start from 2020 and they end in 2024. There are job listings on Hacker News, on Indeed in the US, UK, and Germany. And you can see that the number of job posting peaked in 2021, 2022. And they're now kind of back to where they were in 2019, 2020. So there are fewer jobs out there to apply to than just 2 years ago, for example. And there are more applicants per job. So this is, I talked with a startup, a scale-up in the US called Supply Pike. They're based in Arizona. I think they're around 50 or 100 people. They require people to work hybrid. So you need to either move to Arizona they're Arkansas. You need to move there or be willing to move there. So, it's not a full remote company. But for one posting, for every one open headcount, they get 192 intern applications for software engineering, 164 software, and 37 senior engineer. And their CTO shared some observations with me this January. They said that internship applications doubled since last year. Software engineering applications tripled since last year. More big tech applicants from Facebook, Google, etc. Senior engineers are no longer kind of shopping around, interviewing, and then choosing the best one. They're just taking the first one. And they're saying that from their perspective, compensation as for returning back to normal, which is always gives pleasure to hiring managers. It just means that it's harder to negotiate a higher compensation package. We also see fewer developers quitting. So this January, with the help of Dominic Jack Weston, who's part of Founder Keeper's CPO forum, he asked around, how are you seeing basically people quitting at your company? 50% of EU founders said no change, but another 50% said they see a lot fewer people quitting. And with fewer developers quitting, there's just less hiring because you need to, backfill fewer people. Another thing that we should expect as software engineers is just slower career growth. And this is just because when there's less hiring, either because of backfilling or companies not growing as much, there's just less need for more senior elite positions. You don't really need, if you have a team of 10 and you have a pretty good distribution of seniority, you will not need that many more tech leads or staff engineers from a budget perspective. We never recognized this because until now, those teams were growing. This year was 10, next year 15, 20. There was always room to get promoted, but there might not be a business reason, so there's going to be fewer promotions. And here's the thing, a few companies, I think, are kind of preparing for this new reality of fewer promotions. And Shopify is a good example. I'll just talk you through. I wrote this article just a few months ago asking, is Shopify responding to higher interest rates by changing their promotion process? Which sounds pretty cheeky, but it's actually a legit question. Here's what Shopify did. Before, they had levels from C1 to like C10, C6 was senior engineer, I think C7 maybe staff engineer, and you get promoted from C4, C5, C6. It's just a leveling framework. That was the only way to get promoted. They changed this. They introduced a mastery score from 0 to 50 on each levels for like C6, C7. And now they're saying there's two ways to advance your career. You can either up-level in your mastery, so go from a 30 points on C7 to like 40 points, because you're getting better at your craft. And going higher, by the way, it means a pay rise, it does mean bonus, it means all those things. Or you can change your scope, go from C7 team lead to C8, I think, a discipline lead. But then your mastery drops, and they're emphasizing that's now a different job. And you should think about, do you want to do that different job? Now, what this is really preparing for, I also thought about it, and my thinking was that I think they're kind of watering down the old meaning of promotions because they're probably expecting to see a lot fewer promotions. And I talked with a manager at a company who actually agreed with this. But at the same time, I think what Shopify is doing is brilliant because it's not great to work at a company and, until now you saw promotions every 1 or 2, or every 2 or 3 years, and now it's going to be, 4 or 5 years with no promotion. But at Shopify, people are going to advance every 6 months. Their mastery will increase. They will get small bonuses. They'll get that recognition. So I think it's really smart what they're doing, and I think more companies will follow, or companies that look ahead and they see that they're going to be hiring less, they should follow. So Shopify, I think, will keep their engineers happier this way. So this is the new reality for software engineers. It's tougher to get a job, and promotions are harder, and the career growth is slower. What does this mean for, this change mean for software engineering practices? Clearly, when we're looking at a time where there's less money, more constraints, more focus on efficiency, we should be choosing more boring technology that gets the job done, right? And I made this comic to illustrate this point where you can choose either to, choose the technology that solves the business problem, it's proven and good and it's working, may that be Java or PHP or jQuery. Or you can just choose the really, really cool technology, right? You could do Rust, you could do Next.js, you could do Kubernetes, although I'm no longer sure where that goes. And I just wanted to make this funny point that this choice should be obvious, that you should press the business button. But the more I looked at this photo, the more I felt I don't really want to press I really want to press the new technology, because that's how we learn. That's what's fun. And new technologies are usually there for a reason. They usually have better performance. They work around the limitations of the other stuff, and they're the future. So, I want to say that we're going to see more people pressing this left button just to solve the business problem, but I think most engineers will just say, let's just choose both. Let's press both at the same time. We'll use this new technology in order to solve your business problems. And this will still mean we'll try to justify how to use a really cool new tech, but we will be mindful of solving the business problem. But the truth is, we will have a lot more pressure as software engineers coming from especially from the non-technical people, the business leadership, to choose the boring technology, because that will be their preference. It might not be our preference, but it will be theirs. And just to show how different this used to be just a few years ago, what technology choices during the zero interest rate periods look like, I'm going to single out Monzo here with a Slack message that their founder and CEO sent to the team, and they actually put it on a conference, so it's not some internal conference. And this was in 2015, so in the middle of zero interest rates period. He went, step 1, go. Step 2, microservices. Step 3, who knows? Step 4, profit. And this was actually shared on a microservices conference in, I think, 2016 as the explanation of why Monzo chose microservices. Because after Uber, I think they have the most microservices out there, one of the most. They have thousands of microservices with 500 engineers, so it's like a couple of microservices per engineer. They got it to work for themselves, but if this really was the reasoning, that raises some questions. But I am glad, by the way, that they shared this, because this was not just them. A lot of companies thought like this, right? With CTOs, even the CEOs really bought into this, because what this meant, don't forget, this kind of made some sense. Back then, it was really hard to hire software engineers. Even if you had the funding, you struggled. You needed to give them something else, like cool technology. So I think what this really said is, we know this way we're going to hire software engineers, and they went to conferences to talk about it and to hire more software engineers, and they succeeded. But seriously, one thing that's going to change looking forward, I've been talking to a lot of startups. I think monoliths are making their way back yet again. It's just starting to become trendy to start with a monolith and then stick with the monolith. There's one company that's been doing this for a long time, Shopify. You turn it into modular or monolith, obviously, but there is some sense in this, in the sense that when you know you're going to hire a lot of people for the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to double your team every time, microservices solves an organizational problem. If that's not going to happen, you don't really have an organizational problem to solve, so monoliths should be good enough. But I suspect that in a few years we'll be going back. But for now, monoliths might just be the new microservices. Who knows? Full stack is in full swing. We've been hearing full stack a lot, but I'm hearing it way more everywhere. And here's a simple explanation why. Here's a typical small team that's building iOS, Android, web, and backend. 2 backend engineers, 1 web engineer, 1 iOS, and 1 Android. How does this look like when you change your tech stack a little bit to something like React Native or Flutter or something else? Well, you can just actually have, like, I guess, 3 types of engineers, all who are full stack. 1 with a backend focus, 1 with a web plus backend, 1 with a mobile focus. I know there's caveats on this, but you can produce a similar output. You can produce those iOS, Android, and web applications, and functionality-wise, they'll be similar, and now you'll have a smaller team, less communication. From a manager perspective, it's a lower budget. And one thing that's helping this transition, so if we compared it to, it's pretty obvious, it's a different number of people. And again, smaller teams do move faster, right? But TypeScript is helping make this transition. I'm seeing so many startups that have been started the past few years who talk about how TypeScript makes all of this possible. Blue Sky, the company we talked about, one of their, I guess, secrets was they use TypeScript almost all the way. The backend is in TypeScript, the frontend is in TypeScript, the mobile apps are in TypeScript. It's using React Native and Expo. And so all of their engineers can modify any part of it. Well, I mean, you still need to know the domain, but all of their 12 engineers modify the backend, the mobile, and the web. This is pretty incredible. And it's not just a Blue Sky. A Linear, the popular product management solution founded by Thomas Hartman, a former colleague of mine at Uber, he told me this in October. I get reminded daily how awesome it is to have just one language, TypeScript, for the entire stack from backend to frontend. It's safe to say that our tech stack is serving us well. And this is, I don't want to single out TypeScript, but like having a technology where your engineers can contribute to the whole stack is a good one. One more thing that's changing is developer responsibilities are shifting left. You're going to probably hear shift left a lot on conferences in the coming years. And what this means is before, a few years ago or even a decade ago, we had developers write code and I guess we had QA test it and we had ops deployed to production. Obviously this has already changed at a lot of companies where developers do all of this thing. So they write, test, and they deploy it. You might have some platform teams that help with this. But we're now also starting to see more things shifting left on developers. Security, some SRE tasks. And from the other side as well, there's a little bit of project management. So like, I don't think developer jobs are at any risk of, like there's this question of will AI replace software engineers, which seems like a very popular one says, but I don't think it's happening. What is happening as a software engineer, we're going to be doing a lot more of this work, and there will still be some of these specialized roles, and in companies, security engineers exist, but there will be fewer of these specialized roles per 50 or 100 software engineers. And finally, I think we're just going to see less reinventing the wheel. We're going to see companies, instead of building your own platform solution that we've seen so many companies do, like there's this like open secret pretty much that in the tech industry, every single large company reinvents React Native internally. And I've seen it. We've done it at Uber. It was kind of built because React Native wouldn't scale or do or whatever we wanted to do, and then it was built for a couple of years, rolled out internally, quietly retired. But it happens everywhere, and I think this reinventing will just stop. We'll see a lot more buying softwares or adapting open source solutions. So this is I think the new reality for software engineering practices. More push for boring technology, monoliths becoming more popular, full stack becoming more popular. More shift left and less reinventing the wheel. I mean, and all of these are kind of, I guess, practical or sensible. So like, they don't seem too drastic. I think the only one, we could get into argument is like monoliths versus microservices. But outside of that, not that much. And so for the last part, have we not seen some of this before? All this change. And there is a bit of a deja vu with the dot-com bust. I talked with people who were working during the dot-com bust during 2001, so there was a huge investment splurge from like 1998 to like 2000 into all these companies like Webvan, which promised a 5-minute grocery delivery, and I guess, they went bankrupt, but like 20 years later we have Instacart, which promises maybe a 30-minute or hour slot delivery. But And then there was a big bust, especially in Silicon Valley. People lost their jobs, and it was really, really hard to get jobs. And here's quotes from two people who were in that time. So here's a quote from someone who graduated in 2006 saying, I was laid off by the time I graduated. Most of my friends' startups failed, and we were all desperately looking for work. She's a computer science major in the US. We were competing with experienced engineers who were also laid off and whose startups failed. Every day we heard a big startup collapse. It was really depressing. And she said, we accepted anything, part-time, unpaid internship, just under the premise to build our resumes. And she pivoted from software engineering to consulting as a website developer and then into technical PM. And this is Nivea Henry. She's now director of engineering at Shopify in New York. And she told me that I think for like 5 or 6 years, she worked at these like non-technical roles as a software engineer because that was the only way she could get that job. And she went back into software engineering later on. And here's one learning from the dot-com bust from someone who graduated there, a Google SRE. And this person said that his learning was 20 years later, always be on the revenue side of whatever company you work for. Make sure that they sell software and don't use software to sell for something else. I mean, this is a way to say that if you work in a profit center, your jobs are more safe during a time where there's a focus on efficiency. And going back to Ken Beck, I asked Ken Beck what similarity he sees in the 2000s, where he already was working for 20 years, and now, and he listed a couple of things. He's saying very interesting things. Fixed specification and upfront design are back, and iterating continuously are just happening less. He's saying that. There's more handoffs between like developers handing off to QA or someone else. It's a bit more like, oh, we did our job, we did it perfectly. It's like it's not our problem now. We don't want to be responsible. Apparently, he's saying he's seeing more documentation. People just document more. Again, potentially to like say, we've done our jobs perfectly. Like, don't bug us with this. And less frequent deployments to prod, and just longer feedback loops. And we're kind of talking about why this is happening. And my theory is that there might be this thing, like when you're working in an environment where it's kind of stressful and you're kind of fearing for your job and your manager, not really, but you could be let go anytime. If the company does well, you want to do a great job. You want to show that you're busy, you're doing the best job. So you're going to document it, you'll hand it over, and there's a bit of less incentive to take risks, to take that bug that is not your stuff that you might not be able to fix, even though the customers want it to fix. Because if you fail, it might make you look bad. I'm not sure, but it seems Ken Beck said that after dot-com, the same thing happened. Like things slowed down, it went more into silos, and it took a while for it to ease up. So I just wanted to share because it's so interesting. And this is what I think. I think there's a push to kind of become focused or utilize or to make sure you look busy. And then there's just no time for, slack to do when you're not as busy. You actually have time to step in and do all these things. But what is different in 2024 versus in 2000? A few things are differently. In 2000, the internet was growing rapidly. Today, AI and large language models are growing rapidly. And here's the investment, the percentage of investment in all venture capital going into AI. By the middle of 2023, $1 in $4, so 25% of all of VC investment went into AI. So clearly, this is whatever the internet was. It looks like the AI, in terms of investment, looks like it's AI. So it's different. But in 2000, the tech industry was much, much smaller. Let me show you the 7 largest publicly traded tech companies in 2003. And on this list, the ones that are boldest, so like Google was number 4, Microsoft and Apple number 6 and 7. The others were non-tech companies. And in 2024, the top 4 are tech companies, and actually 5 out of the 7 are tech companies, and they're way larger, by the way. If we compare the Microsoft size back then, even in adjusted dollars, the tech industry has become massive. It's everywhere. And I think the only question is, how much larger will it become? It's still growing, but at some point, that growth will slow. So, as takeaways, what happened in the 2000s after a big boom and then bust, it's probably going to happen now to some extent. We will probably we're already seeing the more doers, fewer planners. When companies are doing layoffs in software engineering, engineering managers are often targeted a lot more because teams are being flattened. I know some startups that let go a lot of their middle management or directors of engineering, but they didn't touch software engineers because they know they're the doers. And so for engineering managers becoming hands-on, and a lot of engineering managers moving back to tech lead positions to be more doers than planners, be seen less as an overhead. We know, by the way, there's a reason for the overhead, but in this scenario, a lot of companies are kind of ignoring it. There's a lot of doing more with less. And and a lot of a full stack push, and just using boring technology. So getting a job is more of an effort, so you just need to plan for it, and here's some advice. Your network is becoming a lot more important, whether you have it or not. If you have it, it's good to rely on. If not, it's good to try to build it. Referrals are more important. Applying early is becoming important because there's so many applications coming in that sometimes only the first, 50 or so are being looked at. Investing unpaid time in interviews, like take-homes, it's going to be just the norm. And it's becoming a bit of a numbers game. You need to apply to a lot of places to hear back. One big change, I think, one thing that will help greatly is becoming more, business or product-minded, which means just understand the business model of your company. How are they making money, or are they even making money, or can they become profitable at some point? Build a relationship with your product manager, who should be really good at understanding it and figuring out how we can transform that. And then just talk with people outside of engineering, customer support, research, come up with ideas on how you can help the company. The software engineers who can help their company make more money or spend less money are really, really valuable. And I think most companies are going to be looking for those kind of people. I wrote an article about this called The Product-Minded Software Engineer. Just Google this, and I share a couple of more advice there, insights. And my final takeaway is just, in this environment, I think we should all aim for career security, not job security. And this is a quote from someone. Thank you for the clap. And here's a quote from someone who, under one of my posts, commented. Her name is Ellen May. She said, "It's always worth preparing for the possibility of job cuts. I was this is her saying, part of layoffs in 2001 and 2, where there were 4 rounds, 1 per quarter, and it took our organization from 180 people to 35 people. And from that experience from layoff, she was also laid off, I learned that there's no such thing as job security. I can either promise it as a manager, because now she's a manager, or expect it as an employee. What I can do, what all of us can do, is have a career security. Keep learning, keep working on challenging projects at your company, and keep working with great people. And this is the most you can do." And she said that after she got let go, she did find different positions. Again, hopefully this will not happen with most of us, but it's good to keep in mind for this time. So, what happened in 2000 likely to happen now? Getting a job is more difficult. Becoming product-minded is a good strategy, and aiming for career security as well. And to close with, I just want to mention the elephant in the room. And by the elephant in the room, obviously I mean AI. I'm liking this term less and less, artificial intelligence, because it suggests that it's intelligent. I just like to say what it is. It's large language models. That's what we mean under AI. And I don't think that AI will replace developers. There's this question going around. It's really popular. It gets trending on social media. But I do see that it makes developers using tools more productive. It makes me more productive when I use GitHub Copilot, or I use ChatGPT for some of my brainstorming, some of my patterning, picking up technologies that I'm not as familiar with. It really makes a big difference. So my suggestion is just make these tools your ally. Understand how they work. You can Google an article from Stephen Wolfram called "How Does ChatGPT Work?" In a few pages, he explains it really well. It's a very simple underlying technology using a lot of data. Try out the tools. Copilot, Cody, any other thing that you can get your hands on, and just get your own opinion on it. Improve your own workflows, because it's just an assistant. It's just like your ID, your autocomplete is an assistant. These tools will be an assistant. And with these tools, you probably can pick up new frameworks faster. I certainly do. And just avoid the hype. So see it for yourself, see what works. There's way too much hype out there. Most from people who don't write code with these tools and don't know where it's helpful and where it's not. Make them your ally. And finally, as closing, don't forget, there's a lot of change right now. But this change, even though for many of us who've not been working professionally in 2000, it's not happened before, it has happened in industry before. And even though it feels like there's some downward spiral, actually what's happening is we're going back to what it was like before in 2018 or 2019 or even the 2000s. And the tech world was pretty awesome even then. So I believe the tech world will continue to be a great and interesting industry to work in. And even though it's way less predictable, but this is what makes it part of the fun and part of the challenge. So thank you for your time.